In February 2026, palace security cameras reportedly captured something shocking. Camilla Parker Bowles allegedly removing priceless jewelry from Queen Elizabeth II's private collection. Staff froze, footsteps echoed down the corridors, and whispers spread through the royal household. Even King Charles III was said to be enraged, confronting Camilla in private. But how did this scandal unfold, and what does it reveal about the hidden tensions inside the palace? The palace had always been a place of whispered secrets, polished floors, and glittering chandeliers. But on that cold February morning in 2026, Buckingham Palace felt different. A tension hung in the air that no amount of gilded decor could hide. Staff reported an unusual stir in the usually quiet corridors, jewelry missing, cases slightly ajar, and alarms that had never been triggered before quietly blinking. It was the beginning of a scandal that would shake the monarchy to its core. At the center of this storm was Camilla Parker Bowles, the Queen's consort, who had long walked a delicate line within the royal family. Known for her influence behind closed doors, Camilla had rarely been at the center of public controversy, until now. According to reports, she was seen accessing the Queen's private jewelry collection without prior notice, raising immediate alarm among palace aides. Footsteps echoed in silent hallways. Staff froze, unsure of how to intervene. What made this incident unprecedented was not just the alleged removal of jewels, it was the betrayal of trust. Buckingham Palace had centuries of protocol for handling royal possessions, and nothing in recent history suggested a breach at this level. In fact, palace records show that in 1971, a minor jewelry mishap led to tighter security measures. That incident involved a junior aide, and it had never reached the public eye. Now, decades later, something far more serious seemed to be unfolding, with the most senior members of the royal household at the center. King Charles III was reportedly alerted immediately. Known for his meticulous attention to detail, Charles was said to have been enraged and deeply disappointed upon hearing the reports. Sources claim he confronted Camilla in private, though no official statement was ever released. The king, who had carefully balanced public perception with family loyalty for decades, faced a dilemma few could imagine: act swiftly and risk public exposure, or manage the matter quietly and protect the palace's reputation. This was not merely about missing jewelry. It was about the very foundation of trust within the royal household. Staff whispered in hallways, aides scribbled notes frantically, and security officers reviewed footage over and over. Even seasoned palace insiders admitted they had never witnessed anything like this. A lesser-known fact: Buckingham Palace houses over 50,000 pieces of jewelry, many considered priceless, with strict protocols requiring multiple sign-offs before any item is moved. Allegedly, some of these protocols had been bypassed in the hours leading up to the discovery. And then came the moment that would define the day. The first official acknowledgement, or what passed for one, came in hushed words among senior aides. "We have a problem," one reportedly said, voice trembling. The palace, usually a symbol of order, was in chaos. Cameras clicked, phones lit up with alerts, and the tension in the air was palpable. The bigger question loomed: was this merely a personal misstep, a misunderstanding, or the start of a scandal that could unravel the carefully curated image of the monarchy? This wasn't just another royal dispute over protocol. It was something far more explosive. Staff and insiders were left asking themselves the same chilling question: could this breach of trust alter the course of the monarchy forever? But what really made this situation different from past royal scandals wasn't just the jewels, it was who was involved, and what they might do next. The tension that began in Chapter 1 did not fade overnight. In fact, it only escalated. Reports of missing jewelry quickly turned into whispers of betrayal, as palace aides realized that this was not a simple mistake. By the afternoon of February 15, 2026, the story had already reached senior officials within Buckingham Palace. Cameras clicked in every corridor, phones buzzed non-stop, and a sense of unease filled the air. Staff moved cautiously, glancing over shoulders, knowing that history was being made, but also fearing the consequences. At the center of this storm was still Camilla Parker Bowles. Allegedly, she had taken items from the Queen's private collection, including several pieces that had been passed down for generations. According to insiders, the missing items were not just decorative, they held historical significance and immense monetary value. Among them were a pair of diamond earrings from the Victorian era and a sapphire brooch reportedly gifted by Queen Victoria herself. The act was not just theft, it was symbolic. The Queen's personal treasures represented centuries of royal legacy, and their disappearance struck at the heart of tradition. King Charles III was reportedly informed immediately. Sources claim he was shaken to the core, and aides describe him pacing the halls late into the evening, deliberating his next steps. Charles had always been cautious in public matters, preferring diplomacy over confrontation. But this was different. The palace was now in a state of emergency, and the king had to act decisively. Allegedly, he convened a private meeting with senior advisors, including security chiefs and legal counsel, to determine the best course of action. The emotional impact on the family was profound. Queen Elizabeth's aides reportedly described her as devastated and betrayed, though the Queen herself remained silent in public. A lesser-known fact, in 2015, the Queen had implemented new tracking systems for the palace's jewelry collection after a minor inventory discrepancy. At the time, the incident seemed minor, but it was actually a precaution for moments like this. Unfortunately, according to insiders, these systems had limitations that allowed certain items to be moved without immediate detection. Meanwhile, rumors began to swirl in the media. Though the palace had not issued an official statement, sources leaked details of the investigation to journalists, sparking a frenzy of speculation. Headlines hinted at betrayal, theft, and family drama. Public curiosity skyrocketed. Within hours, polls suggested that nearly 65% of the British public were concerned about internal conflicts within the royal family, a statistic that palace communications had never seen before. The turning point came late that evening when the king reportedly confronted Camilla directly. The meeting was described as tense and private, with aides standing just outside the door, listening to muffled voices. Some claim that Camilla initially denied the allegations, while others say she confessed under pressure. Either way, the confrontation was decisive. Charles had to weigh not just the personal betrayal, but the potential damage to the monarchy's reputation. Every decision would be scrutinized by the press, public, and even foreign dignitaries. But the tension didn't stop there. Palace security reviewed hours of surveillance footage, uncovering movements that suggested this was not an isolated incident. And just as the king began planning a controlled resolution, another revelation emerged. Some of the missing items had already been moved to an unknown location within London. The palace was facing not only internal betrayal but an unfolding mystery. And yet, no one could predict the fallout this scandal would trigger, not just in the halls of Buckingham Palace, but across the public eye and even within the royal family itself. The morning after the king's private confrontation with Camilla Parker Bowles, Buckingham Palace was tense. Phones buzzed constantly. Security cameras clicked in silent hallways. Staff whispered behind closed doors. The palace, a symbol of unshakable tradition, now felt like a house teetering on the edge of chaos. The fallout from the scandal had officially begun. By February 16, 2026, word of the incident had leaked to the press. Although the palace had not released an official statement, journalists began piecing together the story from unnamed sources. Headlines ranged from "Royal Betrayal Rocks the Palace" to "Queen's Jewelry Vanishes, a Crisis in Buckingham." The media frenzy was immediate. Television crews lined the streets outside the palace gates. Cameras flashed at every turn. Pedestrians stopped in awe. The story had become impossible to contain. At the center of the public storm was King Charles III, who faced an impossible choice. Reports indicate he considered handling the matter quietly to protect the monarchy's image. But with the media attention mounting, silence was no longer an option. Advisors recommended swift action, noting that public trust in the crown was at stake. A lesser-known fact: in 1986, a minor jewelry incident involving Prince Andrew had been quietly managed behind closed doors. The palace hoped history could repeat itself, but this situation was far more serious. The scandal also prompted an unprecedented legal review. Palace lawyers examined the royal prerogative and the Queen's personal property rights, determining how far the king could go in addressing the alleged theft. Some insiders claimed the situation might even test constitutional boundaries, since the theft involved items that were both personal and symbolically royal. Another surprising fact: in 1922, King George V had faced a legal dilemma over missing family jewels, which had threatened public confidence in the monarchy. Lessons from history seemed to echo through the palace halls. Meanwhile, Camilla's position became increasingly precarious. Sources reported she had been confined to private quarters while legal and family consultations took place. Couriers moved back and forth, carrying documents and signed statements. Some staff claimed to hear her voice raised in arguments through the palace doors, though these reports remain unconfirmed. The tension within the royal household was palpable. The king's aides reportedly described it as the most emotionally charged situation in decades. Public reaction was immediate and polarized. Some expressed shock and disappointment, calling for accountability. Others defended Camilla, citing her years of dedication to royal causes. Polls conducted by independent agencies suggested that over 60% of the public were concerned about internal trust issues within the royal family, a figure unprecedented in recent memory. Even foreign media reported extensively, highlighting the potential diplomatic embarrassment. Adding to the chaos, whispers of internal alliances emerged. Certain royal aides were said to have supported the king, while others allegedly sympathized with Camilla. Historical precedent suggested that such divisions could deepen the scandal. In 1970, a minor court dispute over family property had temporarily split palace staff into factions. Now, decades later, history seemed to repeat itself, but with much higher stakes. And then, the unexpected twist. Investigators discovered a partial ledger listing the Queen's missing items, suggesting the removal may not have been random. The implications were chilling. Was this a personal act of betrayal, or something more calculated? Staff began speculating whether Camilla had motives beyond what anyone imagined. The palace had moved from shock to suspicion. But what no one outside those gilded walls realized was that the scandal had only just begun, and that the decisions made in the next hours could redefine loyalty, trust, and the future of the monarchy itself. The palace walls could no longer contain the storm. By February 17, 2026, the scandal involving Camilla Parker Bowles had exploded into public consciousness. Phones buzzed endlessly, and social media feeds were flooded with speculation, memes, and accusations. Crowds gathered near Buckingham Palace gates, some waving banners, others whispering in disbelief. The air was thick with tension, as if the very bricks of the palace were holding their breath. Reports from royal commentators painted a picture of growing alarm. "This is unlike anything we've seen in decades," claimed Robert Jobson. "The idea that personal items belonging to the Queen could be mishandled by someone so close is shocking, and it shakes the public's trust in the institution itself." Surveys conducted that week revealed that nearly 68% of the British public felt uneasy about internal palace conflicts. A lesser-known fact: in 1952, when King George VI passed away, a minor controversy over royal jewels sparked public debates, but it never reached this level of scrutiny. The media frenzy intensified. Television channels ran continuous coverage, highlighting every development, whether confirmed or rumored. Newspapers printed speculative stories about Camilla's alleged motivations, questioning whether personal ambition, frustration, or even jealousy had driven her actions. International news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a crisis in a centuries-old institution. Some reports claimed that the scandal could weaken diplomatic relationships, given the symbolic importance of royal possessions during state visits. Palace communications teams were scrambling to manage the narrative. Official statements were scarce, carefully worded, and calculated. They described the incident as a matter under internal review and urged the public to respect privacy. But in the age of instant information, these words did little to slow the spread of rumors. Crowds outside the palace were reported to be chanting, cameras capturing every expression, every gasp, every tense pause as staff appeared at windows. Interestingly, opinion among royal insiders was divided. Some aides suggested that public sentiment could be softened if the king acted decisively, perhaps by suspending Camilla or arranging a formal inquiry. Others feared that any move might be interpreted as weakness, further eroding public confidence. A confidential memo, later revealed in a 2026 royal leak, indicated that palace officials were concerned about the long-term impact on the monarchy's image if this scandal is mishandled. Social media added a new dimension to the crisis. Hashtags like #RoyalBetrayal and #WhereAreTheJewels trended across the UK and beyond. Users shared photos of royal events, comparing them to past occasions, and speculated on Camilla's demeanor at public appearances. The story became interactive, with citizens debating motives, alliances, and possible consequences. A shocking fact: similar online speculation in 2019 around minor palace controversies reached only a fraction of the audience. Now, nearly everyone seemed to have an opinion. Amid this chaos, a surprising shift emerged. Some of the public began to question the king's role, asking why the palace had allowed such vulnerabilities to exist. Editorials suggested that systemic failures in palace security and oversight may have contributed to the crisis. Reports also hinted at a previously unknown royal protocol concerning personal property, showing that even centuries-old rules were vulnerable to interpretation. This added a new layer of intrigue. Was the scandal a result of personal betrayal alone, or did it expose deeper structural issues within the monarchy? The public debate escalated, but the palace remained deliberately opaque. The mystery surrounding the missing jewelry and Camilla's actions left the nation waiting. Every statement, every movement, every glance was analyzed. Citizens discussed not only the immediate scandal but the implications for monarchy, tradition, and trust. Even casual conversations in cafes, train stations, and offices were dominated by this story, as if the crown itself had become part of the national pulse. And just when the public thought they had a grasp on the scandal, whispers of secret letters and private meetings within the royal family promised to reveal even more shocking truths. Truths that could change everything the nation believed about loyalty, trust, and power. The public frenzy over Camilla's alleged theft had barely begun to settle when the palace itself became a battlefield. Behind the gilded doors of Buckingham, whispers turned into arguments, and arguments turned into heated confrontations. The king, normally measured and deliberate, was reported to be pacing late into the night, his advisers trailing anxiously. Staff heard muffled voices, doors slammed, and the occasional stunned silence that spoke volumes. For the first time in decades, the royal family faced a scandal that threatened to fracture their unity from within. Sources claimed that key meetings were held in secret chambers, away from prying eyes. These private sessions included the king, senior advisers, and select family members, all grappling with how to address the betrayal without further tarnishing the crown. Camilla herself was said to have demanded a private audience with the king, though whether her motives were apology or justification remains unconfirmed. One palace aide reportedly described the scene. It felt like the air had thickened. Every word carried the weight of history. Historical precedent played a role in these tense deliberations. In 1936, when Edward VIII abdicated, similar family conflicts erupted over duty versus personal desire. Palace insiders pointed out that the tension then had shaped the monarchy's approach to internal disagreements for decades. Now, those lessons were tested again, but this time under the unforgiving gaze of modern media. Lesser-known fact: letters from Queen Elizabeth II in 1955 show that she had warned her family about how personal disputes could be amplified if mishandled, emphasizing discretion above all. Within the family, loyalty and resentment clashed. Reports suggest that some aides secretly sympathized with Camilla, citing her decades of dedication to charitable causes and royal appearances. Others argued that the betrayal was personal and intolerable, demanding immediate action. Even King Charles's closest confidants were divided. Tension rippled outward. Cousins, nephews, and senior courtiers found themselves caught between competing loyalties. The situation grew even more complex with the discovery of a confidential letter. Allegedly written by the Queen before her passing, the note outlined her concerns about safeguarding the crown's personal possessions, emphasizing that trust within the family was paramount. Palace insiders described the letter as a silent reprimand, a reminder that personal integrity was as essential as public duty. For Camilla, this letter became a focal point, with some suggesting it implied a pre-existing distrust that had gone unaddressed for years. Amid this pressure, minor confrontations reportedly escalated. Staff overheard discussions in hushed tones about personal grievances, betrayals, and possible consequences. The king faced the impossible task of balancing personal feelings with the monarchy's reputation. Every decision risked public outrage, further media scrutiny, or deeper familial fractures. Lesser-known fact: during the 1970s, Prince Philip had similarly mediated intense family disputes over protocol, showing that internal diplomacy was as critical as external perception. Then came the moment that changed everything. A secret family council was convened, a gathering of the king, senior advisers, and select relatives, to determine Camilla's fate. The discussion reportedly lasted hours, with tempers flaring and loyalties tested. Each participant weighed the emotional cost against the practical necessity of protecting the monarchy. Allegedly, one senior aide whispered that the council's outcome would define the rest of the century for the royal household. And just when it seemed that a decision had been made, a new revelation surfaced, something previously hidden in the Queen's private archives, that threatened to upend every plan, every alliance, and every assumption about loyalty within the royal family. The moment the family council concluded, the palace gates were already surrounded by cameras, journalists, and curious onlookers. Every word, every gesture, was analyzed. But behind the scenes, the real battle was just beginning. Not one of whispers or private confrontations, but a legal one. Lawyers were called in, and the monarchy's rarely tested legal framework faced its sternest challenge in decades. The king's legal team immediately moved to secure the missing jewelry, citing royal property laws that date back to the 18th century. These laws, rarely invoked, allowed the monarch to reclaim personal items from family members if misappropriated. A little-known fact: in 1786, a similar case involved Princess Amelia, daughter of George III, whose private jewels were subject to recovery by the crown. The parallels were not lost on advisors. History was repeating itself in a modern, media-saturated context. Camilla, reportedly uncooperative, hired her own legal counsel. The palace faced a delicate situation. Taking legal action against a close family member could inflame public opinion, yet failing to act would signal weakness. Internal memos revealed that lawyers debated whether the case should be handled privately through palace arbitration or formally in the courts. The decision carried enormous stakes, not just for the jewelry, but for the monarchy's reputation. Court documents, later leaked to the press, revealed the complexity of the situation. Camilla's legal team argued that some of the jewelry had been given to her in previous decades, citing informal gift practices within the royal family. The king's lawyers countered with documentation showing the items remained the queen's personal property, protected by the Royal Household Property Act, a law rarely invoked in modern times. Reported sources claimed that the back and forth had the potential to expose decades of family secrets, including the queen's private catalogue of jewels, some valued in the millions. The media followed every step, intensifying public scrutiny. News outlets published detailed breakdowns of the legal arguments, while commentators speculated on the potential fallout for the monarchy. Social media became a courtroom of its own, with hashtags like #RoyalTrial and #CamillaControversy trending for weeks. Polls showed that public confidence in the monarchy had dipped, with only 54% of respondents stating they trusted the royal family to handle internal disputes properly. Surprisingly, the legal battle also revealed previously unknown facts about palace security. Alleged internal audits, reportedly from 2022, showed gaps in how personal property was catalogued and stored. Advisors noted that these vulnerabilities had never been addressed, making it easier for items to be removed or misplaced. The king faced the unenviable task of demonstrating control while maintaining public trust, a balancing act that tested both his leadership and emotional resilience. Amid this tension, an unexpected development occurred. A confidential letter from the queen, once thought to be merely ceremonial, surfaced in court filings. The letter outlined protocols for protecting personal property and emphasized discretion, even among family members. For the first time, the legal framework intersected with personal accountability, revealing that the Queen had anticipated disputes like this decades earlier. This revelation shifted the narrative, giving the king's legal team a stronger footing. By late February, a tentative resolution was reached. Camilla agreed to return the disputed items under supervised conditions, though the terms were kept confidential. Some royal aides described the moment as a relief, while others warned that the emotional wounds within the family would take much longer to heal. Lesser-known fact: in 1901, a similar resolution occurred involving Queen Victoria's personal property, and historians note that family relations were permanently altered despite the return of the items. But just when the monarchy seemed to have regained control, a new piece of evidence emerged, one that had been hidden in the Queen's private archives, threatening to reignite the scandal and challenge the monarchy in ways no one could have foreseen. The palace corridors finally fell silent, but only for a moment. The tension that had gripped Buckingham for weeks had not fully lifted. While Camilla had returned the disputed jewelry under strict supervision, whispers of betrayal and lingering resentment still floated through the gilded halls. The king, once calm and composed, was reportedly exhausted, physically and emotionally. Staff described him walking the corridors at odd hours, pausing to stare at portraits of the Queen, as if seeking guidance from beyond the grave. Publicly, the royal family issued a carefully worded statement. The matter had been resolved internally with discretion and respect for the monarchy's traditions. But behind closed doors, the story was far more complicated. Advisors debated whether this statement would quell public concern or spark further questions. Media outlets continued to dissect every word, analyzing phrasing, punctuation, and even the order of names mentioned. Lesser-known fact: In 1979, a minor dispute over royal wording in a public statement caused diplomatic tensions with several Commonwealth nations, showing that words alone could escalate crises. Camilla's position in the family remained fragile. Some relatives never fully forgave her, seeing the scandal as a personal betrayal, while others noted her decades of service and charitable work. Private dinners and secret conversations continued to shape alliances. One insider claimed, "The walls themselves remember the arguments, the tears, and the laughter. Nothing here is ever truly private." The legal recovery of the jewelry couldn't heal emotional fractures. King Charles reportedly emphasized family unity, stressing that the monarchy must endure beyond personal grievances. Camilla, though complying with directives, reportedly felt isolated under constant scrutiny. Historically, the monarchy survived worse: abdications, divorces, political crises, but the mix of family betrayal, media pressure, and legal exposure was rare. A minor twist emerged. Some recovered jewels had slight damage, prompting internal investigation. The question remained: could the family truly regain trust and unity, or was this only the start of deeper conflict? Publicly, the monarchy recovered some confidence, but emotional and institutional scars lingered. Polls and reports suggested that nearly half of senior palace staff felt crisis management needed reform. The scandal revealed the human side of the crown: pressure, betrayal, and tough choices under scrutiny. The royal family survived, but Buckingham's history had been forever marked. What do you think? Should the royal family have acted differently? Could this scandal have been prevented, or was it an inevitable test of loyalty and power? Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more royal stories. Hit like to dive deeper into the secrets and dramas behind the palace walls.